Uh, our speaker this evening, Ted Floyd, grew up in Pittsburgh and received his bachelor's degree from Princeton and his PhD from Penn State University. He has an extensive background in ornithology, including grants from the National Science Foundation and the Organization for Tropical Studies, and he served on the board of the Western Field Ornithologists. For over 20 years, Ted has been the editor of Birding, which is the bi-monthly magazine of the American Birding Association. Along with being the author of more than 200 popular articles, technical papers, and book chapters on birds and nature, Ted has written 5 books, including the Smithsonian Field Guide to the Birds of North America, and his most recent book, How to Know the Birds, The Art and Adventure of Birding. Ted has taught biology, math, and statistics to everyone from second graders to advanced graduate students. His particular interests include analyzing bird vocalizations, interpreting birds and nature for children and beginners, and in applying new media and emerging technologies toward the appreciation of nature. We look forward to your talk, Ted.
All righty. Well, thank you, Bill, for the gracious introduction. You dug up some very ancient information on me there. I can't resist noting, and thank you by the way for the shout out there for Western Field Ornithologists. I was also on the board of Colorado Field Ornithologists, hi Linda Lee, for quite some time as well. So I'll just throw that little tidbit in there. Delighted to be here with all of you all this evening. We were, of course, convened here by Zoom. Zoom has its disadvantages and its advantages. You know, the disadvantage, of course, is that we're not really all together in the same space. I just love those sort of very impromptu, wild conversations that would, just sort of bust out underneath the Tyrannosaurus there in the Denver Museum at so many DFO meetings back in the old days. But what a real advantage to these Zoom meetings, and I love this, is that well, we have folks from all over. Hello to all of my friends from Colorado, but also to my friends from far afield. Bill mentioned my Pittsburgh connection, and I see Adrian Izagiri's name out there. I hope that means that Maya is with us, so our very youngest participant. We have at least 2 addresses here from Colombia, like in South America tonight, and possibly 3 or 4 people from watching in from Colombia. I saw Mia from Utah and Barb from Wyoming. Of course, I can't believe I forgot that. And Patrick from Cape May. So we've got folks from all over, and I'm really, really gratified by the folks from, of course, my local friends, but also my more far-flung friends as well. Talk about the whole idea of letting go and sort of taking a look at what birding is going to be like in the future. But before that, I just feel compelled one more time to, oops, what did I do wrong there? There we go. To acknowledge that this is a presentation of the Denver Field Ornithologists. It's an organization I've been, I have to confess, sort of an off and on member of, and I'll re-up tonight, I promise, if I'm not currently re-upped, but a huge supporter of. I've gone to so many of you all's presentations. I love the field trips. DFO is just a splendid organization. I guess for those of you all who are in the inside, you know that already, but to those of you from Cape May and Utah and Wyoming and Columbia and Pittsburgh and elsewhere, this is just such a great organization. There's 3 awesome strengths of DFO. The first is their incredibly long-term support of field ornithology. I mean, longer than Bill and I have been alive. It's been a very, very long time since DFO has been continually supporting field ornithology. Marvelous field trips, but also most important, at least with regard to what I'll be talking about this evening, really, and this is a much more recent initiative for DFO, reaching out to and engaging folks who have been disengaged from the birding and nature study communities until fairly recently. And that's really going to be what I'll be discussing for all of our time together this evening. So delighted to be sponsored here this evening by Denver Field Ornithologists, and I commend this organization to each and every one of you. All righty. I am going to state a sweeping premise right now. which will set the stage for what is to follow. I believe that bird watching in particular and nature study in general in the US and really probably worldwide is at an inflection point right now. Birding has sort of gone up the curve about as smoothly as possible. But if you kind of do your, what is that, the second derivative, we're at this point where the shape of the curve is shifting here right now. And like, it's the year 2022 and we can't go up any further. We can't keep going in this direction, this trajectory. Something's going to bend, something's going to break, something's going to twist, something's going to reform. And that's really, really exciting to me. And that's what we're going to be talking about this evening. In particular, I'm going to take a position that is sort of novel for me. I've actually given future of birding talks before, I think, in fact, to this organization. And I've always had this view that that history is sort of deterministic and it's just going to happen. And we're just in that big river of time, just going downstream. And the best we can do is sort of just try to anticipate what's next, what's coming up around the bend for us. And I've actually articulated that viewpoint to this very organization, also to CFO and to other groups before. And, I think there's a lot of validity to that point of view that history just happens. I think that any properly deterministic classical physicist would say that that's exactly the way history happens. But I'm going to take a different, actually very different perspective this evening and say that I think we actually have a lot of say in what's going to happen. We are at an inflection point, and history could go this way, or wobble off that way, or something like that. And I'm going to take the point of view that we have some say that volitional history, a history that we can determine, is right ahead of us, and we can make a decision. We can consciously decide as a group of people, as a community, where birding and nature study are going. So that's my big thesis, and now we're going to pick it apart, deconstruct it, and see where we might all be going. I'm going to do something that I often do, which is to start us off, this is sort of an icebreaker here, in a realm as far removed from bird watching as possible. I'm going to look at I'm going to look very, very, very briefly at 3 human endeavors that are not bird watching at all. I'm going to do this first just to kind of keep things light and easy, but also so that we can look at how other human undertakings at inflection points right now are confronting their futures. We're going to do this very, very briefly, and then we're going to come right back to bird watching. So we're going to look at hunting, baseball, and playing the violin. We're going to do those 3 things really, really quickly now. I promise it's just going to be a few minutes at most, and then we're going to pick up with bird watching. So even as we talk about hunting, baseball, and playing the violin, I assure you we're going somewhere with bird watching. So let's talk first of all about hunting. All right, so here we see 2 folks who are out hunting. It's a little boy and his, eccentric uncle, or maybe his grandpa or somebody like that. And what I want to say about hunting is the following: whether you're an ardent hunter or a militant anti-hunter or don't really care, all of us would agree that hunting is very, very powerfully about the intergenerational transfer of culture and knowledge. It's very, very easy to picture that this boy and his, let's say, his old uncle are really sort of one and the same. And I think about this from time to time because I'm not a hunter, and my dad's not a hunter, and my son's not a hunter. And it's funny, if you were to put my son and my dad together, and they're like 65 years apart in age, and if they were hunters, they would instantly bond over the fact that they're hunters. So that's just the one observation I want to make about hunting, that hunting has this really, really strong intergenerational transfer of culture and knowledge. That's hunting. All right. Number 2, baseball. So baseball to me is sort of the same thing. It's the American pastime. Maybe it isn't anymore, but it was the American pastime. It is something that is transmitted generation to generation. And again, in this image here, kind of like the one we just saw, it's so easy to imagine that the older person in this image is that kid's uncle or dad or a coach or a mentor or somebody like that. And the older guy is teaching the younger guy how to play baseball. And again, this intergenerational transfer of culture and knowledge is really important. And on this note, I do think in a different way about my father, my son, and myself. So here's the deal. My father and I are lifelong baseball fans. My son's not a baseball fan at all. And although my son and I have a lot in common, my dad and I don't have that much in common. When he and I get together, we can totally talk about anything in baseball as if we'd been like together for like the entire year. He lives far, far away from me right now. We could, without any forewarning, talk about the everything that's going on in the 2022 Major League Baseball season, we could also talk about the 1922 baseball season, way before my time, in fact, way before my father's time. So baseball, like hunting, brings these generations together. I will note darkly that both baseball and hunting are existentially confronted now with declining interest and participation, but we'll hold that thought for a moment. The third of the three non-birding interludes I wanted to start us off with is playing the violin. So this is the great American violinist Hilary Hahn, one of the greatest violinists of her generation, perhaps of any generation, but that's not my point here at all. Hilary Hahn is also a very prominent and successful and sort of provocative advocate for bringing the violin to the sorts of people who never ever had any connection with violins or with classical music at all. She's actually gotten some heat for that because she's bringing music to people in ways that is unfamiliar or uncomfortable to the establishment. So great violinist, nobody would disagree about that. Also a great advocate for the violin and a person who is keenly aware of the importance of bringing music to people in a way that might be where those people are, but not necessarily where the current generation of violin aficionados happens to be. Okay, so we have looked at hunting, baseball, playing the violin. I promise we're going to look at birds for the rest of our time together here. And I will also say that Hilary Hahn's model is one that I'm going to, without mentioning her name again, be appealing to over and over again in this evening's presentation. All right, back to birds. The remarks I'm about to deliver, which are all bird-based from now on, are intended to be provocative, but in, I hope, a good-natured and even charming sort of way. I hope that we are going to be completely collegial about all of this. I'm going to be saying things that I hope will press buttons and ignite, sort of uncomfortable outside the box feelings. I have enough of these that I'm going to touch at least one button for everybody. I shared with a friend 10 topics I might touch, and he said, I agree with you on 9 of those, but don't you dare touch the 10th one. And John Lowry, if you're out there, I'm going to touch the 10th one as well. So we're going to have fun. We're going to be cheery. We're still going to be friends at the end of all this, but I am really going to try to push a couple of buttons with a smirk on my face and a twinkle in my eye as we go along. I often say this, but at this point, I really, really need to say that I am speaking on behalf of myself, not on behalf of some of the organizations that I am affiliated with, most prominently the American Birding Association. I love the ABA. I have been strongly affiliated with the ABA now for almost half my life and well over half my professional life. I do not presume to speak on behalf of the ABA or its management in the remarks that are to follow. However, I will say that everything that I'm about to say has come out of conversations and sharing and learning and discovering together with my colleagues and also with the members of the American Birding Association. It's funny, I've just reached my 20th anniversary with the ABA, and I'm actually more excited about the American Birding Association than I ever have been before. We've had our ups and downs over my 20 years, and we're just doing everything right now. Our young birder programs and sort of a new approach to our publications, different approach with some of our events and so forth. So love the ABA, commend the ABA to all of you all, but I don't speak on behalf of the ABA this evening. All righty, let's go from that very general sort of view of the way things are to some actual bird specificity. I am going to, in a series of images now, share with you the experience of birding as I understand it in the year 2022. And I think I have some images here all the way back to 2021, but some very current images of birds that I hope give a feel for this inflection point that we're at now with bird watching. And I'm going to do so by way of a bird that everybody loves to see, a great horned owl. No matter how many great horned owls you see, this is one of these birds like a peregrine falcon or a Eurasian hoopoe or an American dipper that like you just stop to look at. I hear and see owls every day and night. And if I hear an owl hooting at 3 in the morning, I still have to get up out of bed and go out and look for that great horned owl. I love great horned owls so much. I well remember my first great horned owl back on December 17th, 1982 in Frick Park, by the way. It was a moment of absolute wonder and glory and magic and majesty, realizing that there were owls and really fearsome, great big owls deep in the heart of Pittsburgh. And this realization that there are owls, including like the greatest owl. Like, this is the best owl on earth, and it's in many of the big cities in the United States and also Canada, and actually all throughout the Americas as well. So owls, awesome owls, great horned owls, these emblems of the mystery and the nighttime and wilderness. But actually, I've been sort of deceiving all of you all, because this is not really what the engagement of an owl is all about. We're going to look at the exact same owl now, but we're going to back out actually just a couple of feet and look at it from this perspective. So, of course, a human being was out there. Now, actually, two human beings were out there. This is a very meta photo. That's my daughter, Hannah Floyd, photographing that great horned owl. There's no such thing, it's sort of like the tree falling in the forest, as an owl that's just out there. The moment we humans engage an owl, we inject ourselves into the owl experience. Owls are about birds and people. They're not just about birds. And that is a situation that I confront and wonder about all the time. For example, on Christmas Day last year, this is Wanaka Lake, a Greenlee Preserve right by my house in Lafayette. I know a few of you have been birding with me here. In fact, one of you might even be in that picture for all I know. But this is a great horned owl on Christmas Day last year. This was we had a very mild Christmas here in the Denver area, as you may remember. And this great horned owl was out there all day long. I went out there several times, and every single time I went out there, there was a group like this of people watching that great horned owl perched right out in the open. And a question that I wondered about was, whether the bird was being disturbed. Were we harming the bird by being out there? And it's a complicated question, and it's probably the answer is to some extent unknowable, but I'm just going to venture that broadly speaking, the answer is no, we weren't disturbing that bird at all. It could have flown away if it had wanted to. There were plenty of other places to go. It was roosting in the most sort of prominent spot above the trail, as if it wanted to be looked at, as if it wanted to taunt all of us who couldn't get quite as close to it, the bird, as we wanted to. So there are humans where there are owls, and in cases like this owl roosting on Christmas Day along the trail at Wanaka Lake, there were humans all day long. I am nearly certain that hundreds of human beings stopped to marvel at the owl that day. Indeed, the idea of an owl as an emblem of wilderness, I think, is more and more problematic, as this next image reveals. If Alejo Williams Viveros is out there, you found me this bird. I don't know if you remember this when you were still living in the United States. I just put out what I called the Walmart challenge. I said, could anybody go out to a Walmart and find me nesting owls? And Alejo went out the next morning and found this pair of owls nesting underneath the pharmacy in the Walmart Supercenter at the corner of 287 and Baseline Road up there in busy Lafayette. This is the story of owls in our present time. After Alejo discovered this owl, you may remember, Linda in particular, there's that conversation on Co-Birds about people finding great horned owls. It was like, I think it was April, maybe April, I think maybe May, probably April. People just finding great horned owls, the Walmart in Colorado Springs and the Walmart in Pueblo and the Walmart in Grand Junction. Like, great horned owls have just found Walmarts. And of course, they do very, very well there because there are no predators there. The Walmarts are actually good places for great horned owls to fledge young, as in this image here. Speaking of young, and this is my last great horned owl image, I want to present this, when you think about it, this sort of troubling image. So this is, of course, a baby great horned owl. This is a bird that was at Greenlee Preserve just a few months ago. And I took this picture. And what I haven't told you is how I obtained this photo. Now, the following is hypothetical. It's conjectural. Please don't run away based on what I'm about to conjecture. But what if I told you that I had baited this baby owl with frozen dead mice and used a recording to bring it in real close and then blasted it with a flash to get this great image and then posted it on social media? Okay. Actually, I didn't do that. I didn't have any dead mice in my pocket. I don't like using recordings for various reasons. My camera, I don't even really know how to use my camera to have a flash. I wouldn't know how to turn it on. And by the way, there was a very conspicuous fence between me and the great horned owl, and I probably would have been cited for trespassing if I had gotten a little closer. So this is a very natural photo of a great horned owl. I want to be perfectly clear about that. But I'm not going to ask for any show of hands. I'm not asking for any confessionals. I just want you all to ponder it. Have you ever baited a bird, used a flash, played a recording, gotten a little bit too close to a bird? If there's somebody out there who can answer no to all four of those, you're not telling the truth, or you haven't done much bird watching. I mean, we do get close to birds, and we play recordings of birds, and we have cameras that even if they don't flash, they click. And maybe baiting owls with frozen dead mice seems severe, but what about chumming for albatrosses, or feeding hummingbirds, or feeding chickadees? We interfere with nature all the time. So I just want to set that scenario out there, and then use that as a segue for identifying the two, as I see it, two huge challenges for engaging birders and bird lovers and nature lovers in general at the present time. They are as follows. The first is that if we, that is to say, those of us who already are birding, could just be friendly, we would bring lots of people into the fold. And the second, and this is so people that owl stakeout, as it were, at Wanaka Lake, or even at the Walmart. I know a lot of people want to see that bird. Just get the word out, be nice, be gentle, be friendly, be kind. And then the second is to behave ethically. And owls, to me, more than any other bird, suggest the problems of ethics with lots and lots of people out there. So keep those two ideas in mind, that we need to be nice and we need to be ethical. Because I'm going to argue, it's going to take me a little while to get here, that being nice isn't sufficient. Being ethical isn't sufficient. And oddly, being nice and being ethical, although those aren't bad things, they're not really the most important things that we need to do. We need to do things other than be nice and be ethical. We need to do things different from that. All righty. We're going to move right along here to a sort of series of human adventures that I think get at these questions of being nice, being welcoming, being ethical, and some of the challenges that we face in the present time. I'm going to start off with we're in the dark here now, and you just see my black screen. You have to listen to me for a little while here, but I want to tell you all the story that I know some of you all were very directly involved in of an event that happened every winter in Boulder County for many, many years. Some of you all probably remember this. The Boulder Bird Club for years sponsored it, but we would all convene at the Valmont power plant in central Boulder there on a cold day in January, like at 7:30 in the morning, and go into the innards of the power plant, sorry, not the power plant itself, but the cooling reservoirs, and look at all the exciting gulls and ducks and raptors and other birds that were in there. And for the first 8 or 9 years that I was involved in this, I was always struck by how few people went on that event. If the weather was nice, we would have 18 or 19 people. I remember a particularly cold day when the event was so small that we just all packed into Dave Madonna's SUV and just drove around the dikes out there at the lake. And an idea occurred to me. Well, what if we just changed the time of this outing? Instead of doing it at 7:30 in the morning, what if we did it at 1 p.m.? And this is what happened. There are far more than 18 or 20 people here. The first year that we started to have the outing at 1 o'clock, we had to do sign-ins. That's one of the requirements for getting to the Valmont power plant here. We had just under 100 people. I think there were like 92, 93 people. The second year, I know about this because we wrote an article about it, we had 227 people sign in. And then the third year we did this, we ran out of paper and the pencil broke when we were at 450 people. Sorry, 350 people, but they were still streaming in, and security told us that well over half a thousand people, more than 500 people, were out at Valmont Reservoir that afternoon. The only reason for that was because of the time. It's because we met at 1 p.m. when like normal people are out on even, by the way, it was like a Broncos, well, sorry, Sunday, January, Broncos weren't playing, but it was a football Sunday in January. Some team was playing, and we still managed to get more than 500 people out there on a perfectly nice football Sunday to, check this out, to go watch seagulls. I mean, who in their right mind would spend a January afternoon watching seagulls? And by the way, the fact that in the year one, the camera, and then in years 2 and 3, this is the biggie, the Denver Post publicized this event, helped a lot. But the biggie was the time of day. Now, the way I've told this story, let's just take another look at all these folks out birding here, is that it was just a simple matter of changing the time from 7:30 to 1 p.m. What could be simpler? Well, actually, there was some pushback, not so much within our local community, but sort of amazement from outside. I'm going to tell an extremely quick story right here about a presentation. I'm going to sort of avoid names here, but by a leader in the birding community who was talking about all the ways that we can be inviting and welcoming. It was really, really good advice. Don't have signs that are only in English. Don't have images that are only of old white people. Don't have imagery of very, very expensive optics. One that doesn't occur to me all that much, but I think it's very, very true. Avoid 11 a.m. on a Sunday, not just because of church, that's a good point, but because the kind of community aspect of church in the United States is especially heavily participated in by Black and brown people, more so than by white people. And so all these great points came out. And then he asked the audience, can you think of like something else you would do? And I mentioned the idea of starting an outing at 1 p.m. instead of 7:30. And the speaker, a marvelous person, by the way, was like, I'm never going to do that. You got to go birding. It's not real birding if you don't start at 7:30. I'm going to borrow a phrase I've heard from Adrian out in Pittsburgh again. It has to hurt. It's not real birding unless it hurts. Now, that's just, Adrian and I were joking when we talked about that, but I think that attitude is really out there, that it does sort of have to hurt. And the lesson from Valmont is that by changing the experience of birding, we actually changed it. We weren't just welcoming. We weren't saying, oh, we'll smile at you and laugh with you and be charming with you if you show up at 7:30. We actually altered the nature of the activity. And that's really, really different from being welcoming. Anybody can be welcoming on their own terms, but we changed the nature of the activity and we went from 18 participants to like 500 plus participants because we were subtly altering the way we birded. We're gonna look at some more dramatic examples before too long here. This image is actually from about 10 years ago. This image is from just last year. This is another event that begins at 1 p.m. on Sunday. Some of you all recognize that this is the beginning of a Lafayette Birds outing. The city of Lafayette holds these outings every, the first Sunday of every month at 1 p.m. And it's a very conscious and deliberate plan to get folks who ordinarily probably wouldn't go nature watching to come out. It's a beautiful day, but 1 p.m., 7, so 5.5 hours earlier, it was cold and there was like a hard freeze out there. Nobody would go out, no normal person would go out at 7:30 to Wanaka Lake. But on this particular outing, cold November day, we had 75 people. They're just beginning to show up here. And this brings up a second point I want to bring out here. These outings are completely open to anybody. There is no restriction. We are clear that you can actually bring dogs. You're allowed to bring dogs on these outings. You are allowed to bring cell phones on these outings. You're allowed to bring baby joggers on these outings. I've certainly seen a great many of outings where dogs, for sure, cell phones, and even children are prohibited. That's not my cup of tea. Speaking of children, I well recall that four of the leaders on this trip were under the age of, at the time, under the age of 18. And sort of our senior leader, and I hope I have this right, Alejo, but was 9 years old at the time, maybe 9 or 10, I'm not sure, but this is Alejo Williams, who's now living in Columbia. So Columbia's gain, Colorado's loss, leading the group out to study geese. And then Owen Robertson and Kieran Schitzman were out there as well. So wonderful to, and probably Hannah Floyd was the leader that day as well. I ought to acknowledge that. So just wonderful to have an outing here with dogs and baby joggers and cell phones. And I remember at one point, just people started passing out it was shortly after Halloween. It was like the 4th of November, and like this huge sack of Snickers bars was being passed around there. Like, who wouldn't want to go bird watching on a beautiful Sunday afternoon at 1 p.m., led by 4 of the most brilliant young field ornithologists in Colorado. And they ran us through the ringer on goose identification. We had like 4 species of geese and like 3 hybrid combinations, and Alejo and Owen and Kieran and Hannah and a few grown-ups really worked us through that. So a different sort of birding, but I think a really wonderful sort of birding. Let's touch a few more third rails here. Let's push a few more buttons. The next one up is this question that I was asked about by an email correspondent just half an hour before this presentation. Andy, if you're here, we're going to talk about a question you had about sort of the ethics of engaging birds, and especially this question that we all hear at this time of year: should you leave your hummingbird feeder up? And you often get these sort of, kind of nasty responses. No, you're going to ruin their migrations or something like that. This image is from less than a week ago, and I love how this immature female black-chinned hummingbird is completely overwhelmed by the opportunities available to her here. We're like down to 1 black-chinned hummingbird at Greenlee, and there are like 5 hummingbird feeders out there. She's going to be doing just fine until she finally decides to go and migrate. So yes, leaving up a feeder does mess with the species, or at least the individual's biology, and also with whole populations biology. The problem to me isn't so much a bird that might migrate a little bit later, like this black-chinned hummingbird, but whole populations changing. We know that several species of hummingbirds have drastically shifted their ranges, their wintering ranges, to the southeastern United States. And that's due in large part, perhaps entirely, but in large part at least, to the fact that like every single home in Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi and the Carolinas and Tennessee and Kentucky has hummingbird feeders. Like after like NASCAR, it's the most popular thing in the South. Everybody feeds hummingbirds, and the hummingbirds have figured this out. We have drastically altered the wintering biology of hummingbirds as a result of this. So that's not a great thing. But on the other hand, we also do things like live in homes and drive cars and build buildings and just exist as a species that have much more significantly impacted bird populations. To me, the educational value of feeding birds is so strong. It greatly outweighs the fact that this little black-chinned hummingbird is probably drinking way more sugar than she should be, but she'll probably be back next spring. And just, I think we can sort of lighten up a little bit about hummingbirds staying too long at their feeders. So I obtained this image with a little digital point and shoot camera that I use. And this brings up another third rail, which is the whole question of digital photography. My ABA colleague, Greg Neese, and I talk all the time about digital photography and how it's changing the way we bird. For me and Greg, that's an incredible positive. The fact that we are out there taking pictures of like hummingbirds like this. And you know, that's a difficult identification to call that bird an immature female black-chinned hummingbird. I think we have learned so much about digital photography. I just want to give one example of how that is coming into play. If you know me, you know I can't have a talk without my favorite bird, the bush tit. So these are bush tits at Greenlee Preserve, you know, literally 500 feet from my house. And what I want to bring to your attention on these bush tits, I've had this animation right. Well, firstly, something extremely obvious here. These probably don't look like bush tits you're familiar with unless you live in Mexico. These are black-eared bush tits. They have bright black patches on the face. This type of this type of bush tit, the black-eared bush tit, subspecies melanotus, formerly species melanotus, is quite possibly a distinct species. They're not supposed to be in Colorado. And the basic idea is that, well, the ones that we get that are black-eared are immatures that are in sort of this dark phase, immature males that are in this dark phase, and they quickly lose it in the fall. Now, if we look at the first one of these black-eared bush tits, this is a photo by Hannah Floyd, by the way, you see that that is in fact a dark-eyed bird. So this is consistent with the idea that this is just a color morph. The other images, though, are much more interesting. Here is an image of an adult female. Notice the yellow eye. That's a photo by Adriana Nelson from just a couple of weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago. These birds are only supposed to be in Mexico when they have the yellow eyes like this. Here's one that I photographed shortly after Adriana discovered the black-eared bush tit at the feeder. And then back in the summer, Dan Vickers found, this one's a little bit harder to see here, but this is early summer, by the way, just right after the summer solstice, another adult female black-eared bush tit. This is the sort of thing you do not notice when you're just out birding. I can barely see bush tits, and I can't hear them very well anymore either. They're just going so fast. But we take pictures of bush tits, and we learn that, lo and behold, there's this stealth population of black-eared bush tits right here in Colorado. And despite the conventional wisdom that there are only these briefly black-eared immature males, here are 3 different adult females with the black ear. A brand new discovery made possible by folks with digital cameras out at Greenlee Preserve. Let's keep talking about cameras. Here is an image from, I think, about 10 years ago of me. That's me about to lurch over the cliff there at Phantom Canyon up in Larimer County. But what I want to do is bring your attention to the person in the front with the red water bottle there. That's Rosemary Kramer, now a prominent birder and ornithologist and artist in her own right. She was a teenager at the time. And when I was at Camp Colorado, that's an ABA camp, by the way, 10, maybe it was 12 years ago. I don't quite remember when it was. I felt really bad for Rosemary, because if you look carefully at her, she doesn't have binoculars. Rosemary doesn't use binoculars. She just birds with a camera and also with her amazing eyes and ears as well. And this scenario of young people without binoculars is something that I've seen over and over again now. Noah Brinkman's out there. I remember the first time I met Noah up in Steamboat Springs, just birding with a camera, no need for a binocular. And it's striking to me how much sort of like hostility there is to the idea that, how could you go bird watching without binoculars? Well, Rosemary's doing just fine for herself. A totally gratuitous image, but I just love this recent image of Rosemary. She has like 20/2 vision. She has like superhuman vision here, and she's been like assimilated by the Borg or something here. But Rosemary, if you're out there, really paved the way toward my sort of conception of birding, even without binoculars. However, I still use optics, and that brings us to this point. That's me. Just a couple of weeks ago in Colombia, in Alejo, not in your part of Colombia. I was way down in Putumayo near the border with Ecuador and Peru. This is a brand new scope that doesn't require a tripod. This is a breakthrough by Swarovski, and I hope the other big companies come out with similar breakthroughs as well. And the bird that I'm looking at in this image is one that I bet none of you, not even Alejo, has ever seen. Although if Alejo Pinto is with us, he has seen this bird because he showed it to me. This is a chestnut-bellied cotinga, one of the most sought after, most brilliant birds in the very, very high elevations of the Andes, described to science only several decades ago. I could not have lugged a scope up to where we were. It would have been impossible. It was too slippery, too wet, too cold, too rocky, too many precipices, too dangerous. It would have been impossible to have birded with a tripod, but I absolutely was able to bird with a tripodless scope out there. And it's funny to me, again, how I've gotten pushback about not using a tripod. Like, well, you have to do it that way. Well, I wouldn't have seen that chestnut-bellied cotinga if I had had a tripod with me, because I never would even have made it to the place where that chestnut-bellied cotinga was. All righty. Let's touch some more third rails here. These next ones are going to go really, really, really fast, and then we're going to sort of go into the wind down and conclusion part of my remarks this evening. Just a really, really, really quick comment about eBird. I do hear grumbling and grousing from time to time about eBird. I don't get it. What I hear from everybody who uses eBird, no matter how grumbly or grousy they are, is either they freely admit this to me, or I'm able to extract it from them. It's made them better birders. eBird, it forces a sort of discipline on you. You have to, even if you cut corners, you have to note when you started and how far you went and what you saw. And you have to indicate the number of birds that you estimated or counted. If you don't, you put little X's in there, and you have to answer some questions. It just makes you more disciplined. Now, in some instances, yours truly, for example, we get kind of carried away and obsessive with eBird, but I love eBird. It's just made so many of us better birders, and more to the point, and this, my next slide will really get at this too. I think it has resulted in the engagement of I know it's resulted in the engagement of huge numbers of people who wouldn't have been interested in birds otherwise. Which brings me to a sort of close cousin of eBird, the Merlin Bird ID app. I think most of you all know what Merlin is about. Many of you have used it yourselves, but I'm going to cut corners here. Essentially, it's an app that you hold up to a bird that's making a sound, and it tells you what you're listening to. So it's a black-billed magpie, or it's a red-winged blackbird, or maybe if you're really lucky, it's a white-rumped sandpiper or something like that. And Merlin, because it's based on machine learning, is getting better and better and better and better and better. It was kind of clunky in the beginning, which was like a year ago, and now it's like a really, really good way of identifying birds and identifying them correctly. And there are a lot of Merlin haters out there. And there are two reasons for this. One is because Merlin is inaccurate. Now, it's true that Merlin can make some whoppers of mistakes. There was a recent thread on CoBirds about that. That's fair enough. That's a little bit like pointing to the chess computers circa 1996, 1997, that were making some really, really boneheaded mistakes when they were playing, Garry Kasparov and the other great chess masters of the day. But they got better and better and better. And now the chess apps on your phone are far better than the greatest human chess players of all time. Merlin's going in the same direction. Because it's a machine and it just gets better and better and better and better, Merlin's going to be better than the best of all of us just 4 or 5 years from now. So it gets the IDs right. But there's still this idea, and this is the second and bigger point here, that it's cheap. It's cheating. It's corrupted. It's not right to use an app that does all the work for you. And I have a lot of problems with that. What's wrong with asking for help? How is asking Merlin any different from listening to I was going to say an LP, I'm dating myself, an LP or a cassette or a CD, or now, a device. I find that, or I don't know, going to an encyclopedia or a dictionary or asking your mom or dad or a friend or something like that. And to me, I have to say, the folks I know who are most resistant to Merlin are the folks who are most privileged in terms of the mentorship that they received when they were young. And by the way, guilty as charged in that latter category. People call me an earbirder. I don't need Merlin. I just know what's out there. I can't hear some of the birds as well as I used to, but the ones I can still hear, like I know them really, really well. But I was deeply and heavily and powerfully mentored really over the course of my entire life, but especially in my early years. But what about a person who doesn't have access, as I did, to mentors? Somebody who hears a sound in the marsh, or that we hear every spring here in Colorado. You want to know what that is. Well, I had the opportunity and the resources to go ask friends in Pittsburgh who would say, Ted, that's a black-capped chickadee. But if you don't know that, you hold your phone up and you're told it's a black-capped chickadee. I think that's so cool. I think it's marvelous that resources out there like Merlin are providing steady and increasingly accurate answers about what's going on in the natural world to a lot of people who don't have the human resources to tell them what is going on out there. So let's hear it for Merlin. Okay, let's look at a real bird now. This is well, what is this bird? We're going to get to this bird's name in just a moment here. This is a common bird here in Colorado. It's not the world's greatest photo, but it's a nice adult male carrying food. We're in the foothills of Boulder County here. I think most of you all already know what this bird is, but I do want to briefly talk about what we call this bird. And this next image is going to be one that pushes your buttons more than any other image that I have. We're going to look at the name or names for this bird. So this bird is a McGillivray's warbler, and it's spelled exactly like that, with a capital M and a capital G and a capital W. And this comes very naturally, I think, to most of us who are bird watchers. And I will note that it is not a McGillivray's warbler with a lowercase w. We have this convention that we capitalize the name of the warbler in contravention from all style manuals in the English language and just sort of common sense about what we do with the nouns of organisms and other entities in nature. But this is the way we spell McGillivray's warbler, with a capital W, not with a lowercase w. This bird also has a scientific name, Geophilus tolmii, which we italicize and which we sort of reverse the capitalization for. We the name of the person, Tolmie, not McGillivray, we'll get to that in just a moment here, is not capitalized. So lowercase t, even though the bird is named for Tolmie, the bird is not a Geophilus capital T tolmii. So why is this bird called McGillivray in English, but Tolmii, which means of or pertaining to Tolmie, another person whose name is commemorated here? These are two different men named for this bird. Harold Eister, who was a young birder in the ABA's care 12 or 13 years ago, I think he's an academic now, I think at the University of Vermont, wrote a marvelous paper on the kleptonym, the stolen name that is McGillivray's warbler. McGillivray shouldn't have gotten this name. It should be Tolmie. I haven't read this paper in at least 10 years. So Harold, if you're out there, I apologize. I'm sure I'm getting some details wrong right here. But McGillivray didn't even deserve the name. And it gets worse. As I said, we're going to keep it cheery and charming and not sort of get, aggressive or anything like that. But just Google McGillivray. He was a terrible person. I mean, like, he did gruesome things with human bodies, bodies of people who weren't white. And he's commemorated, celebrated, honored. And by the way, I could be wrong on this. I think McGillivray is like not involved in Colorado or Western field ornithology at all here. So a lot of folks have a lot of problems with the fact that this bird is named McGillivray. As Harold pointed out, he shouldn't have gotten the name in the first place. It should have gone to Tolmie. And as sort of folks more recently have come to really, I think, advocate for and agitate for, the person's not deserving of this name anyhow. More third rails to touch here. We also have abbreviations for these birds' name, the dreaded 4-letter codes. All the time in Colorado, I see folks get this wrong. They write out MAWA, for McGillivray's warbler, but that's the name given to the magnolia warbler. MAWA is the name given to the magnolia warbler. So our bird is not MAWA. And I'm being sort of naughty or sort of, I don't know, just sort of sneaky here, but I leave it to the student, as the saying goes, to figure out why it is that our bird goes M, skips 2 letters, GWA, but Magnolia warbler gets the A. It's not nearly as obvious as you might think, and this mistake is made over and over and over again. But the use of these 4-letter codes, and I'm trying to be friendly and cheery and collegial here, it's instantly off-putting to a lot of people. There's been a thick-billed kingbird out in Western Colorado recently, and I saw a really good question on CoBird. Somebody said, what is this tibik guy that you all are talking about? Come on, folks. It's a thick-billed kingbird. It's not guy. That's not even an English word, guy. That's the 4-letter code. It's really off-putting and unfriendly to people who might really actually be interested in knowing what a thick-billed kingbird is, thick-billed kingbird, but not a guy. All right. So what should we do about all of this? Leave these 4-letter codes alone for the time being here, but let's talk about coming up with a better name for the bird called McGillivray's warbler. Well, I think Harold's suggestion was to call it Ptolemy's warbler, but that's a totally uninformative name. It doesn't tell us anything about the biology or the coolness of the bird. So how about calling this bird the Chanting Foothills warbler? How about the Charming Foothills warbler? Yeah, I just made this name up. We find these birds in the foothills. They give that wonderful chirry, 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 chirry. They always sound like they're chanting to me. They're always in the foothills. If we call this bird the Chanting Foothills warbler, that would so perfectly emblematize what this bird is all about. If you go out in Boulder County, Jefferson County, Larimer County, anywhere on the west slope in the foothills during the months of like late May, June, July, even into early August, you will hear a warbler chanting in the foothills. That's just like a really nice descriptive name. But don't ever be guilty of calling it the Chanting lowercase foothills hyphenated warbler. Won't get into hyphens right here, but I will just say that the question of whether to hyphenate or not hyphenate bird names is one of the most heated issues in all of ornithology. I was with a quite prominent journalist a few weeks ago with the, I can't believe I forget the journal. It's one of the most famous journals in England. Financial Times, do I have that right? And it's like their Wall Street Journals, the Wall Street Journal equivalent in Britain. And he noticed that we had hyphens in the birds' names. He asked me why that was. And really, really briefly here, the reason why is we hyphenate the names of monophyletic assemblages, but not paraphyletic and polyphyletic assemblages. That's actually the reason for which we hyphenate birds. It has to do with monophyly, paraphyly, and polyphyly. That's ridiculous. It would be as if we hyphenated like nitrogen, but not hydrogen, due to some really arcane principle, like their outer electron shells or something like that. Folks, they're just words, and yet you were like denoting this incredibly arcane and recondite knowledge about their evolutionary relationships based on hyphens. It's completely abstruse and inaccessible to almost anybody. So Chanting Foothills warbler it is, no hyphen. Let's move along here. All right, we are in the wind down process here. Let me get a sip of water. As we wind up here, I want to return to that sort of premise I had at the beginning here, that we have some say in where birding is going. And I want to share with you all, and I know it's a cardinal sin to have words, and actually in this case text in a sentence here, but just an incredibly powerful statement that Rick Wright, contemporary ornithologist and philosopher, made about the history of birding that just struck me like a ton of bricks when I first saw it. And I'm actually going to read it to you because it's just so powerful. This appeared in an essay in Birding magazine about 15 years ago. And he said that a century ago, it was anybody's guess which direction this newborn hobby of birding would grow in. The defining focus of American birding could have been conservation or life history study or aesthetics or taxidermy or any of the 1,001 things the human mind can do with a living object. Instead, we decided, I believe more or less consciously, to make bird watching about identification. Now, Rick then proved all of this. And I'd never thought about that. Who says bird watching has to be about identification? It could have been about all these other things. Can you imagine if, like, for the past 100 years, instead of identifying birds, we'd been taxidermists? But like, I think Rick's absolutely right. Birding was at an inflection point 100 years ago, and we inflected toward identification, but we didn't have to do that. There's one thing in Rick's formulation, I'm being kind of rhetorical here, and maybe I'm not being fair to Rick here, I take a little bit of exception with. It's that word we. Instead, we decided, I believe more or less consciously, to make birdwatching about it. Actually, I shouldn't say I take exception with this. I find it problematic. I think he's right that this was a community decision, that the folks who were making decisions at the inflection point 100 years ago did decide as a group to take birdwatching in the direction of identification as opposed to, say, aesthetics or taxidermy or any of these 1,001 other things that birdwatching could have become. But to the very beginning of my presentation, this idea of letting go and letting somebody else perhaps determine where birding is going to go is where we're going to wind up now. So I'm going to share with you 3 slides that are a little bit troubling to me. I want to make sure that you all know where I'm coming from here. I'm going to share with you, well, images made by my cell phone from 3 incredibly important field guides. I am not dissing the field guides. I'm not dissing the field guide authors. I'm not dissing the field guide publishers. But these are examples of where our community is and a problem that we as a community have right now. So here is a field guide from about 40 years ago now, one of the most important field guides of all time, one of the greatest field guides of all time, even though the book is now quite out of date in terms of the names used and the range maps and some of the basic information. It was a paradigm smashing, incredibly important field guide for its time, and it remains today exemplary as one of the greatest field guides of all time. But did you catch in the acknowledgement section here that every single named person in English and Spanish and German, I think, and other names has a male name? There is not a name of a woman or female anywhere, as far as I can tell, in the acknowledgements of this book. Every single person who contributed to this book was a man. Now, this was almost 40 years ago, and times were different. Here's a much more contemporary field guide. Again, one of the greatest field guides of all time, much more recent. And check out the apparent genders of our contributors here. Every single one of them, including possibly some people in the audience right now, are men. We know from careful work done at the American Birding Association and other organizations, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, for example, that well over half of the birders in the United States are women. And yet they're completely unrepresented in this very recent field guide here. I'm happy to tell you that I am involved with a project that will be seeing the light of day fairly soon, where at least we are improving somewhat. Here is a partial list of the contributors. Again, folks who are, to some extent, I think, are in the audience right here. And we have a lot of work still to be done when it comes to representation, but I think things are getting better here. But we don't want to rest on our laurels. We can't rest on our laurels. We're still, for the most part, a fairly elderly and white and establishmentarian, sort of coastal, well-educated, well-pedigreed community, and we do that to our terrible disservice. We need more people who aren't just like us in birdwatching. A story, a few pictures, then I'll be done. Back in the 1990s, when I was involved in academic ecology, there was a fascinating question that I was, actually fairly deeply involved in at the time, about whether there was such a thing as a feminine ecology as opposed to a masculine ecology. What could that possibly mean? And I've been out of the field for 25 years, so this situation may have greatly evolved, but this was the thinking certainly in the mid 1990s. And at the time, everything in academic ecology was based on the extreme importance of competition among organisms. This is Darwinian, of course. You have to compete, you have to fight, you have to antagonize one another. That's how the whole world works. And the idea that a competitive behavior can drive ecological systems, which is now dogma, was really brought about by people who weren't men. Competition theory was a very masculine doctrine. Cooperation theory was a very feminist, if you will, doctrine, and the field greatly changed as a result of the admission at the time of many women into academic ecology. Again, for those of you who might be current academic ecologists, I realize I'm talking about the situation in the 1990s, not in the 2020s. So bringing in new people isn't just about being fair, although that's important, or being just, although that's important. It's also about making knowledge and information and ultimately things like learning and benefits to our own human society better. We need more and different voices to understand the world more fully. All right, I'm almost done here. I want to share with you all a few images of what the future of birding might look like. And there's sort of a deliberate sequence here, but I just wanted to show you all some images that I think are all by me, or at least they all involve me, or they're by me, and show, I hope, where we're going with birding in the very, well, it's not even where we're going right now, it's where we are right now. And I think it shows where we might be going farther down. Here's an image from last night. I was out with some friends up in Fort Collins. That's Hannah Floyd, Holly Merker, and Adriana Nelson. And Holly and I are actually, we discovered exactly the same age, but Adriana and Hannah are a fair bit younger. And this image to me is a little bit like that, the baseball image or the hunting image here. I suspect that to some extent, it's just baked into me and Holly. We think of ourselves as mentors, but in our better moments, we also realize we're actually probably learning more from Hannah and from Adriana than they are from us. Here's an image from 2 days earlier. This is up at Lagerman Reservoir. We have just seen several Sabins gulls, and as you can see, we're celebrating with kombucha and malt vinegar, of all things. People my age used to celebrate with beers, but today it's kombuchas and malt vinegar. And again, me and a bunch of folks under the age of about 22. So this image features Gen Xer and 3 Zoomers, but that's still not good enough. Here's an image that I hope one of the folks in our audience is still with us and will recognize. This is from Pittsburgh last summer, and all of these people are younger than me. We have this image, a Zoomer, I think 2 millennials, but did you notice that there's also an alpha in here? I told you, Maya, that you would be in there. So this is Maya hiding under her dad's hat right there. And this to me is even getting closer to the sort of the vision that I have for birding going forward. This is my natal ground, my stomping grounds. This is Pittsburgh. In fact, this is only a mile from where I grew up. Last month, I had the opportunity, though, to be in Colombia, down in Putumayo, and I love this image of another Alejo. This is Alejo Pinto, not Alejo Williams Viveros, and one of his young charges here. Alejo studying the lunch menu there, like, oh yeah, I'll let this kid play with my $10,000 lens. Why not? And I just love this image. Alejo, who is a professional guide and an ornithologist, is so committed to the idea of developing the next generation of bird lovers and people who care about nature in Colombia and also elsewhere in South America. I think he's in Brazil right now doing work just like this. So love to see images like this. And I really commend Alejo for having shared his camera with that fellow. I'm not sure if I would have done the same thing. Here's an image of a Zoomer with alphas. This is Hannah Floyd at a bird watching and insect study event at Lafayette Elementary School earlier this year. We had, I believe, just under 100 elementary school students. I was sort of peripheral to all of this. And what I want to say is that we found some really cool stuff. The kids have better eyes than I do. They have better ears than I do. They can't put names to the organisms, but they sure find them. And Hannah is already commenting on just how brilliant some of these really, really young ornithologists are. 2 more images here. This is one from last fall. Alejo Williams, if you're still out there, that's you actually out at Rocky Mountain Arsenal National Wildlife Refuge. You can't really tell from the image, but I want to say Alejo was like in 4th grade when this image was taken right here. And this is just Alejo, and this to me is sort of the future of birding and ornithology and nature study and caring for nature in the United States. He's documenting, I think, what were we looking at? There was a yellow legs or a dowitcher or something like that out there. And then finally, an image like this one. That's Alejo again, taking notes the old-fashioned way, but also asking questions and probing new frontiers and discovering new phenomena and thinking about the world in ways I think none of us have considered in our many years on this earth. So an image like this one gives me great hope. This is a 9 or 10-year-old field ornithologist. He's absolutely a field ornithologist, contributing to the public record, because I'm sure that those notes were promptly and dutifully uploaded to eBird. And I think that images like this one are just so valuable. I love going birding with Alejo because, and by the way, and others like Alejo, because I finally, after all these years, trained myself to, and this has required some amount of discipline, to let go, to let him do it, and for me to be able to learn from him. I know that we live in unsettled times right now. I'll just leave it at that. But it's also so encouraging to me that a new generation, an expanded generation, a more diverse generation of birders and field ornithologists are doing their thing. Kind of like Prospero in The Tempest. I'm kind of ready to let it all go and turn it over to the next generation. And I would encourage the rest of you all, those of you who are my age and older, to also adopt a sort of Prospero-like output here. We still have a lot to contribute. We can drive people places. We can fund birding. We can provide opportunities. We can, of course, answer questions, provide knowledge, and also material resources as well. But letting go and letting folks like Alejo and others of his cohort lead us into the future, I think, is an incredibly hopeful and empowering thought for people like me. So I suspect that I've run out of time. I know that there will be some questions and answers. So I'm going to I think, stop the presentation and stop the screen share there and turn things over to Bill and see if we have time for discussion.
We do, Ted. Boy, thank you for such a provocative talk. You've given us so much to think about.
Oh, and I realized I went through it pretty fast, but I just wanted to pile it all on you. So,
well, we've gotten a few questions, and I'm
great.
sure that there'll be more coming in. One question is, how did you get the photo of that chestnut-bellied cotinga?
Yeah, okay, so it's funny. I have to confess, I put this talk together today. You can probably sort of tell that. I hope Alejo Pinto didn't ask me that question. I thought very much about using his photo because his was a lot better than mine. He showed me the bird, by the way. But no, I used a small point and shoot camera, the little Canon that I know I and so many of the other younger birders use as well. So the bird was very, very distant, but it was one of the great life birds of my life, and I've actually seen quite a number of them. I took that image with a point and shoot camera. A technology, by the way, that did not exist 20 years ago. I mean, if you had told somebody 20 years ago, you would use let's make it 25 years ago, Nikon Coolpix that came out, I think, in 1999. But yeah, the idea of using a very small, handheld, put it in your big jacket pocket, point and shoot camera to get a picture of a cotinga perched literally hundreds of feet away in the cloud forest. That's just a big change in how we get pictures of birds.
Okay, here's another question regarding names. In changing names, should they remove the warbler, capitalized, New World, name altogether as they're not related to the old world warblers, or update to wood warbler?
Okay, so let me do not a 180, but a 175 on what I said. We can't have complete chaos. I mean, these names exist, and there needs to be some sort of a systematic approach to what we're doing. So I'm not in favor of just willy-nilly just changing the name of every bird. Birds like Canada goose and red-winged blackbird and mourning dove and so forth, I think are going to be with us forever. But to that specific question, that's by the way, thanks very much for that question. I am not a fan of messing with really, really well-established, if you will, last names for birds. Warbler, tanager, flycatcher, vireo, thrush, woodpecker, gull, tern, loon, etc. We know, for example, that all of the birds in the ABA area of regular occurrence that are called tanagers are not tanagers at all. They're cardinals. And some of our cardinalids are tanagers, or former cardinalids are tanagers right now. I would not go around renaming the western tanager the western paranga, or for my eastern friends, the scarlet tanager, the scarlet paranga. So I think names like warbler, tanager, sparrow are here to stay. If you will, the last names of the birds, they're not going anywhere. The first names of the birds, though, I think are ones that we can mess with. Okay.
How do you advertise outings to bring in the younger crowds? Is this a time of day, as you mentioned?
Yeah, I blew past that. Now, do you mean how do I personally, or how should we as a, well, let me do it on behalf of the community. I'm going to speak on behalf of the community. So I think we need to actually get out and talk to people and ask them when they would like to go bird watching. So one of these times to go bird watching is unquestionably later in the day. What I really notice on those Lafayette Birds outings is the youthfulness. And we have some marvelous people who are quite a bit more elderly than I am out there. So no ageism in what I'm saying right here. But believe it or not, if you're under the age of 45, you don't get up before like 11 a.m. on a Sunday. I go camping with my son a lot, and he says, "Oh man, we're gonna get up early. We're gonna get up at 9:15." Like, I've been birding for 5 hours by 9:15. So I mean that's one example there. It's sort of an easy one for me because I kind of like sleeping in myself as I get older now anyhow. But yeah, something for example like just changing the time of day and considering whether the folks whom you want to reach out to are even able to get out perhaps during the work week, for example, when a lot of people have to work, tend to children or something like that. And also to the point I sort of breezed through real quickly during the presentation, consider imagery, the pictures of people that you put out there, what they look like and whether they appear to be affluent and whether they appear to be persons of means. It's really easy to say, oh, relax, just deal with it. We're all friends. But if you're not in a position to look the same as other people or to have the same clothes that they do or to have the same equipment that they do, that can actually be very intimidating. So I think imagery is important, and just sort of considering where and when people are is really, really important as well. I want to say about DFO, by the way, you guys have, the city of Denver has so many incredible places, like right in Denver. Now I know DFO has exciting trips farther away, but if you just had trips to like Rocky Mountain Arsenal, City Park, Cherry Creek, Chatfield, I mean, I'm talking about places that are completely within range of biking, mass transit, or a very short and inexpensive Uber ride, you'd be set for 10 years. I mean, I could happily spend a long time just birding within 8 miles of downtown Denver. So consider that as well. There's an awful lot of really, really cool bird watching to be done right in town. Sorry, I know we have other questions, but some friends and I, some young friends and I went out to see the Mississippi kites that are nesting up in North Denver earlier this summer. And what is so cool is like everyone in the neighborhood knew all about them. They loved their kites. I mean, they knew that the kites were cool birds up there, like Mississippi kites, like right in Denver. You don't have to go to, I love Prowers County, but you don't have to go to Prowers County to see Mississippi kites. You can go to Denver of all places to see Mississippi kites. I can't resist a Pittsburgh shout out now. So we have what now, nesting peregrines and merlins in the city of Pittsburgh. And I got to get back and see that as well.
Ted, I might mention that DFO has provided, as part of our grant program, has provided scholarship money for youngsters to participate in the Evergreen Audubon youth programs.
Yeah, super.
So that's been part of what we've been doing. What does your crystal ball say about birding newsletters, journals, and magazines?
That one hits close to home since that's my livelihood.
Do Zoomers and alphas care about them? Should they take them over from us?
It's funny. So the glib and simple answer is, print's dead. It's just going away, and you give up on it completely. I'm so struck by how people a lot younger than me love what they call chapter books. They actually still like that physical, visceral, I don't know, just material feel of objects. I sometimes think that the people who are most wired and most digital are sort of people my age. So we've been foretelling, and just sort of being gloomy about the imminent death of print field guides for 25 years, and it ain't happening. That said, newsletters was part of the question as well. I do sense that newsletters in particular probably have a sort of a digital only future, but by golly, there's just something, it's like, what's that word I'm looking for? It's like is that anachronistic? No, atavistic. There's something atavistic in us. Like we want to hold books. I don't know. We're like reconnecting with our Chinese or European forebears in the 15th century. Like there's just something about the book. So my crystal ball is murky, to say the least, but it does not foretell the imminent death of print, of paper publications at all.
Okay. Here's a question. The questioner asks, I think that it's great that more young people are interested in birds. However, I'm concerned that so many are listers, in quotes, not really that interested in the ecology of birds.
Well, tempted to ask who asked that question. We're all friends. It's fine. So, back when I was a kid, I was kind of into listing too, and Bill, I bet you probably were as well. I have to go all the way back to Roger Tory Peterson, who almost 100 years ago, I almost know this verbatim. He said that boys in their teens make the keenest observers. Of course, it was boys in Peterson's time. For once they fall under the spell of the lure of the list, they play the game for all that it's worth. That's like 1947. That's not 2002. So yeah, I mean, my mom and I talk about how sometimes, even before I was a lister, I collected beer cans and I counted up sneezes, and I would actually go through the Pittsburgh Press and count up the number of occurrences like the letter E. And I mean, there's something about teenagers and keeping lists and charts and data. Maybe it's just something about all of us there as well. So I know I will actually resist the supposition of our questioner there that it's more or less of a problem now than it was. I actually feel maybe it's a self-selected audience here, but that some of the keenest young people that I know aren't listers. They're really, really, really into getting a great photo or learning biology or contributing to like iNaturalist projects or being eBird reviewers. I don't think it's any more. In fact, I might think it might be somewhat less listy than it was. So yes, being a teenager is to some extent about keeping lists. But I don't think it's any worse now than it was.
Can you go ahead, Susan? You have a question?
Sorry for interrupting, Bill. Ted, I have a question for you, and
Sure,
I
lay it on me.
Analyst, I can't put it into the chat, so I'm
I
just
see.
going to.
Okay.
How are these very young birders connecting with you, and what advice would you offer to DFO as we help as we try to reach out to young people?
Well, you're putting me in. I feel like I'm at my. That's a great question, like my doctoral dissertation defense. All of a sudden, there. Yeah. So again, figure out where and when. And by the way, I don't want to say young people, but just sort of people new to birding and nature. I live near a retirement community, and we had huge numbers of people come into birding during the pandemic through the retirement community. And I'll be honest with you, it's actually more challenging for me to deal with people who are older than me than it is for me to deal with people who are younger than I am. But I would say that keep it easy, keep it easy going. Probably keep it later in the day. I'm resisting the temptation to say, get on social media. I don't think that's the case anymore. Social media is kind of populated by people my age, not people my kids' age anymore. And then also, this is such a cliche, but I'm going to say it anyhow. Just consider that we have an awful lot to share in terms of wisdom and experience, resources, knowledge, and they have an awful lot to share in terms of insight, questioning authority, questioning, shattering paradigms. It goes both ways, and that's how it always just come naturally to me. I've been blessed, I think, with mentors who sort of treated me that way when I was quite a bit younger myself. But I think that if we're just kind of easy and sort of hang loose and just get that we're all sort of in it together, I think we'll go far. I have to tell a real quick story. It has nothing to do with bird watching at all. My son, as some of you all know, is he's as obsessive about bikes as I am about birds, and I'm so struck by the intergenerationality of that community. He mixes just as well with people 2 or 3 times his age as with people his own age, and it's just a shared passion there. I think sometimes we need to just realize that the person who looks different from us or lives different from us or sounds different from us or is educated different from us shares that passion and has lots of insight and knowledge to contribute. I think that's probably true of any walk of life. I think we sometimes get too uptight. We get too, I don't know, scared or nervous. I've often talked to people in education who say they're much more intimidated by their students than by their colleagues, just because they don't want to kind of screw up, if you will, in front of their students. And I get that. I also think it's a discipline to work against, because I think when we realize that we're really all in this together, we have so much to share with one another. And again, consider starting those outings later in the day.
Speaking of all of us and everything being together, really in this together, what are your thoughts on climate change as regards birds? And are you optimistic? Are you optimistic about how the way things are going? And
it's funny, I was actually going to bring that up, and I kind of forgot to. Well, no, I'm not optimistic, but I'm not hopeless about it either. I want to go actually all the way back to blasting owls with tape cassettes and feeding them mice. Again, I don't advocate that practice, but if I were to Actually, this isn't hypothetical. I spoke to a group of young people a year ago in the local high school here about like what's really like central and key to them about being, environmental stewards. And we didn't go anywhere near the question of baiting owls with mice and playing tapes and luring them in and trespassing and doing all those sorts of things. Instead, it was all about our actions as they involve the whole world. Living in smaller homes, driving fuel efficient vehicles, being aware of consequences of activities like where our food comes from, where our energy comes from. And that was really powerful for me because it's so easy for somebody like me to say, oh my gosh, that kid is, whatever, extreme example, shooting a BB gun at that owl. I haven't seen that of late. But when you turn on the light switch and inject some mercury into the environment, that's bad for owls hundreds or thousands of miles away from here as well. So now that's kind of a gloomy thing to say, but it is encouraging to me that I think that actually not just young people, although that seems to be where we're taking this conversation, but that new recruits to birding and nature study seem to be really connectional and global and aware of their consequences. Again, I don't advocate shooting a bird with a BB gun. I really don't. But the idea that what we eat and where we buy our food and where we live and how we comport ourselves on a daily basis has as much to do with the welfare of an owl as whether we harass the owl, I think is actually a very welcome development.
Great. One other thing, getting back to the more mundane, what are your thoughts on that wearing white? Some people are adamant about going out birding and not wearing white.
So amazingly, I was editing I wonder if that's from one of my ABA colleagues, but I was editing an article today about the evil perfidiousness of wearing white while birding. There's actually a famous essay, "Good Birders Don't Wear White." So in theory, the idea is that white is like this universal distress signal, whether it's like a white rump on a bird or the white flag of a white-tailed deer or something. White means like flee, get out of here, go away. I suppose that's true. I surely would not exclude somebody from a bird outing because they were wearing white. For the sorts of activities that scare birds off, I think a lot of us don't even realize, like sort of a sudden motion, and I'm as guilty of that as anybody. So yes, the conventional wisdom is that those muted colors, the darks, the dark greens, the dark browns, and so forth, are less likely to scare birds. But of all the things we could do on behalf of birds, not wearing white would be like number 4,700 on my list. It's just not way up there. So,
okay, all right. Anybody else have any questions that they would like to ask Ted?
Yeah, and by the way, and I'm happy to stick around until sort of the last man. Well, I don't know about last man standing, but if anybody wants to, and I don't, it's up to you, Bill. But I mean, if folks want to, or I don't know if they can.
Susan, do you have any questions, or Peter, Linda?
I don't, and Ted, this has just been so energizing and thought-provoking, which is what we always look to you for. You and one or two other speakers that are recurring speakers for DFO. We really appreciate. You've kind of opened us to new ways of thinking about some things about relative to birding and birds. And,
it's really kind of you to say that, and I have to say back at you. I didn't say this at the beginning, but DFO has always been, and by CFO too, but I'm just going to talk about DFO now. It's always been this sort of a safe space or a happy place for me where, we can sort of get into it. And I just want folks to know out there, like, I'll still be your friend if you use 4-letter codes, and I'll still be your friend if you don't use patronymic bird names. And even if I found out that you like crossed a fence and, blasted an owl with frozen bait, like, we can still be friends about all that. So truly, I mean, we're all in this together. And I know Bill has said that several times right now. And ultimately, I think we're all motivated by the same thing, which is, this immediate wonder and awe at the beauty of birds, and ultimately the welfare of birds and the habitats and ecosystems that they depend on. And I said that sort of with a twinkle in my eye, but on a serious note, we need to keep that in mind. Already I've seen the nasty grams, and it's mostly back channel about, people who are driving all the way out to Mesa County to see the thick-billed kingbird. Folks, in the grand scheme of things, awareness of birds and getting out there and seeing them and sharing with one another and learning and discovering. I mean, we're on this planet. Our species exists to some extent. The act of living, breathing, eating, all of that affects the world around us. And that's true, by the way, of any other organism on this planet here. So I think it's perfectly fair to seriously question what we and what one another are doing out there. But we're really all in this thing together, and I hope we're all friends at the end.
That is a wonderful sentiment to end the evening on. And
I have one more comment.
Oh, yes.
I'm not going anywhere. You can talk all night if you want, Bill.
Yeah. We still have a lot of people tuned in.
I noticed that. What's wrong with these people, especially the East Coasters? You need to put babies
that's
down
unusual.
and stuff. But, okay.
That's unusual for questions, by the way. Usually it's a big fall off. What's your thoughts on what we birding groups can do more in terms of conservation, in terms of habitat preservation, education?
Yeah. So I got asked that question real recently, and I've been asked that question by two different groups of people. So so it's actually a 6-part answer. So it's in 2 installments of 3. I'll try to go real fast here. So a group actually much like you all asked me that question, and to me the big 3 are now this is in increasing order of importance. So I'm going to say the least important one followed by the next least important one followed by the most important. So the least important thing you can do, but it's really, really, really important. And especially, I'm looking at, the 4 faces I can see right here. We, to some extent or another, have some money. So giving money to environmental causes is the least important of the 3 things you can do. Next up, more important than giving money, is voting. We still live in a representative democracy. Voting really, really, really matters. And not just federal presidential elections, like referenda here in Colorado, and I'm sure elsewhere as well. So give money, vote, and the most important of all is educate. I think that as valuable as it is to give money to organizations, so please do join Denver Field Ornithologists and the American Birding Association. As important as to vote, we have a really important election coming up in less than 2 months. Education is key. Now, the group that asked me that question was people sort of about our ages. However, I also got asked that question recently by some teenagers. And my answer to them, because I know there are some folks who aren't quite as old out there, is a little bit different. So forget about giving money. If you are a teenager, and I know we have at least some young adults in the audience here, just forget about it. Ask your parents to give money instead. But instead, vote. Even if you're 17, you can vote in the next election after this one. And if you are 18, you can vote, you can register to vote and vote right away. So number 3 is vote. Number 2 is educate. You don't have to wait until you're like Bill's age or my age or Linda's age to be an educator. You can educate really powerfully your peers. And by the way, people older than you as well. But the advice I'm going to make to the younger set as opposed to the older set is do stuff. Sorry, but Bill and Linda and Susan and I, we're kind of getting up there in years, and we don't have that much energy left in us, and we've kind of done what we're going to do in this life. But if you're 21 or 22 or 23 years old, you don't have to wait till you're my age to start doing things. You can actually really start doing things. You can have jobs in the government, in education, in industry, in the court system, and there's so many ways to do things as well. So no matter who you are, vote and educate, and depending on your age, the older you are, give money, and the younger you are, do things.
Great.